The cardboard box felt heavier than it should have, considering it held everything I was allowed to keep from 63 years of life. My son Michael stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, watching me struggle with trembling hands as I tried to fit my late husband's reading glasses inside. The glasses I'd kept on my nightstand for 7 years since his passing, just to feel like he was still there. "Mom, you're being dramatic," he said, checking his watch like I was making him late for something more important. "It's not like we're throwing you on the street. Sunset Manor is a nice place. You'll make friends." But I could see it in his eyes, the same cold calculation I'd seen when he'd convinced his father to change the will. The same look he'd given me when he'd taken over the family business that my husband and I had built from nothing. The same expression he wore now as he prepared to erase me from the home where I'd raised him, loved him, sacrificed everything for him. If this story is already stirring something in your heart, I'd love to know. What time is it where you are right now, and which city or state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Let's see how far this story is reaching. My name is Eleanor Whitman, and for most of my life I believed that family was everything. I believed that the love you pour into your children would somehow find its way back to you when you needed it most. I believed that the home you build with your own hands, the business you nurture from a dream, the sacrifices you make, that these things mattered. That they created bonds stronger than blood, deeper than convenience. I was 75 years old when my world ended. Not from illness, not from accident, but from the slow, deliberate dismantling of everything I thought I knew about love. It happened on a Tuesday morning in October, when the leaves outside my kitchen window were just beginning to turn the color of rust and fire. I remember thinking how beautiful they looked, how peaceful. I had no idea I was about to learn what autumn really meant. The dying of things you thought would last forever. The house felt different that morning. Too quiet. Too clean. I'd been living there for 43 years, had raised 3 children within those walls, had held my husband's hand as he took his last breath in the bedroom upstairs. Every corner held a memory. Every room whispered stories of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and quiet Sunday dinners where we'd plan our future together. But that morning it felt like a museum. Like everything precious had already been catalogued and prepared for removal. I should have known then what was coming. The heart always knows before the mind catches up. But I was still operating under the old rules. The ones that said family protects family, that love is patient and kind, that the woman who gave you life deserves more than a cardboard box and a one-way ticket to disappear. To understand how I ended up there, you need to know about the life I built before it all came crashing down. I married Robert Whitman when I was 19 years old, fresh out of high school with dreams bigger than our small town could contain. He was 22, working at the lumber mill, saving every penny to buy a piece of land where we could build something of our own. We were poor in the way that young couples starting out often are, rich in hope, stretched thin everywhere else. Our first apartment was above the bakery on Main Street, and every morning we'd wake up to the smell of fresh bread and coffee. Robert would leave for work before dawn, and I'd take on whatever jobs I could find, cleaning houses, babysitting, helping at the local diner during the lunch rush. But we had a plan. Every Friday night we'd sit at our little kitchen table with a shoebox full of crumpled bills and coins, counting out what we could save. 5 more years, Robert would say, smoothing out the dollar bills, and we'll have enough to buy the Henderson place. The Henderson place was 3 acres just outside town, with a farmhouse that needed work but had good bones. We bought it in 4 years, not 5. I'll never forget the day we got the keys. Robert carried me over the threshold like we were newlyweds all over again. And we stood in that empty living room holding hands, imagining where we'd put the Christmas tree, where our children would take their first steps. Michael was born 2 years later in the bedroom that looked out over the apple orchard. I was 25, terrified and exhilarated, holding this tiny person who was half me and half the man I loved more than breathing. Sarah came 18 months after that, and then David 3 years later. The house filled up with laughter and chaos and the beautiful mess of family life. Robert had bigger dreams than the lumber mill, though. He'd always been good with his hands, could fix anything, build anything. When Michael was 5, Robert started a small construction company out of our garage. Whitman and Sons, he called it, even though our sons were still in elementary school. Planning ahead, he'd wink at me. I became the bookkeeper, the secretary, the person who answered the phone and scheduled jobs and made sure the bills got paid. While Robert and his crews built houses and renovated businesses around town, I kept the company running from the kitchen table, making calls between making lunches, balancing books after helping with homework. It was hard work, but it was ours. Every foundation they poured, every roof they raised, every satisfied customer who recommended us to their neighbors. It felt like we were building something that would last. Something we could pass down to our children. The kids grew up in the business. They spent summers on job sites learning to use tools, understanding the value of honest work. Michael was a natural leader, could charm clients and motivate workers. Sarah had an eye for design, could envision how spaces should look and feel. David was the craftsman, patient and precise, able to create beauty with his hands just like his father. We were so proud of them. So sure we'd given them everything they needed to succeed, to be good people. When Michael graduated from college with a business degree, it felt like everything was coming together perfectly. He joined the company officially, brought fresh ideas about marketing and efficiency. Within 5 years, Whitman & Sons had grown from a small local operation to one of the most respected construction companies in 3 counties. Sarah became our interior designer, her artistic vision transforming our work from simple construction to homes that felt like dreams come true. David managed the craftsmen, ensuring every detail met the Whitman standard. And Robert and I, we watched our children flourish in the business we'd built for them, felt the deep satisfaction of knowing our legacy was secure. But success changes people sometimes. And I was too busy being proud to notice when gratitude started turning into entitlement, when respect began shifting into calculation. The first sign should have been Michael's wedding to Patricia. She was beautiful, ambitious, came from money. During the engagement party, I overheard her telling her friends that she was marrying into a construction empire. I laughed it off then, thinking she was just young and excited. I didn't realize she saw dollar signs where I saw family. Patricia had opinions about everything. How the business should be run, how the house should be decorated, how Robert and I should be spending our money. She'd make little comments about our outdated furniture, our quaint traditions, our small-town ways of doing things. Michael started echoing her observations, suggesting we modernize our approach to business, our lifestyle, our thinking. When the grandchildren came, Michael's 2 kids, Tyler and Madison, Patricia made it clear that our farmhouse wasn't suitable for family gatherings. Too old, too small, too far from the city amenities her children deserved. Suddenly our holiday traditions moved to their sprawling suburban house. Our family dinners became catered affairs where I felt like a guest in my own family. Sarah married James, a lawyer who specialized in corporate restructuring. A nice enough man, but one who spoke in terms of maximizing assets and optimizing operations. He'd study our business model like it was a puzzle to be solved rather than a life's work to be respected. Sarah started talking about inefficiencies in how we ran things, suggesting we hire professional managers instead of keeping it family-operated. David stayed single longer, seemed more loyal to the family values we'd raised him with. But even he began questioning whether Robert and I understood the complexities of modern business. He'd come to family dinners with articles about succession planning, estate management, the benefits of professional oversight for family businesses. Looking back, I can see how carefully they orchestrated it. How patient they were. Robert's health started declining when he turned 68. Nothing dramatic at first, just fatigue, some confusion with dates and names, difficulty concentrating on complex decisions. The doctor said it was normal aging, maybe the beginning stages of dementia. He tried to hide it, stubborn as always, but I could see him struggling with tasks that had once been second nature. The children were so helpful during this time. So concerned. Michael stepped up to handle more of the day-to-day operations. Sarah took over client relations and design choices. David managed the crews and quality control. They assured me they were just trying to reduce Robert's stress, help him ease into retirement. When Robert's condition worsened, they convinced him it was time to protect the family legacy by updating his will and business structure. They brought in James's law firm to handle everything, assured us it was just paperwork, just making sure everything was legally sound for the next generation. Robert trusted them completely. Why wouldn't he? These were his children, raised on his values, trained in his business. When they put the papers in front of him, explaining in patient, loving voices that this would ensure the company's future and take care of both of us in our old age, he signed everything without question. I should have read those documents more carefully. Should have insisted on my own lawyer. But I trusted them too. I believed that love was stronger than greed, that the children who'd grown up hearing our bedtime stories and eating my Sunday dinners would never betray the people who'd given them everything. How naive I was. How completely, heartbreakingly naive. Robert passed away on a cold February morning 3 years ago. He died in our bedroom, in the bed where our children had crawled in during thunderstorms, where we'd planned our dreams and shared our fears for 43 years. I held his hand as he took his last breath, and for a moment, even through my grief, I felt grateful that he'd been able to die at home, surrounded by love. The funeral was beautiful. The whole town came out to pay their respects. Robert had built half the houses in the county, had employed dozens of local families, had been the kind of man who showed up when neighbors needed help. The church overflowed with people whose lives he'd touched. My children were so supportive during those first weeks. Michael handled all the business details, assured me I didn't need to worry about anything. Sarah took care of the legal paperwork, said she'd make sure I understood everything once I was ready. David helped with the practical things around the house, fixing what needed fixing, making sure I felt safe and secure. Thought I was surrounded by love. I had no idea I was being systematically isolated. The first change came about a month after the funeral. Michael sat me down in my own kitchen, his expression gentle but firm. Mom, Patricia and I have been thinking. This house is too big for you now. Too many memories, too much upkeep. Maybe it's time to consider something smaller, more manageable. I felt like he'd slapped me. This house wasn't just a building. It was the physical manifestation of everything Robert and I had built together. Every room held pieces of our story. The kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals for my family. The living room where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmas mornings. The bedroom where I'd given birth to Sarah when the roads were too icy to get to the hospital. I'm not ready, I told him. I may never be ready. This is my home. He nodded, patted my hand. Of course, Mom. I understand. We're not pushing. Just think about it, okay? When you're ready to consider options, we'll help you find something perfect. But the suggestions didn't stop. Every family dinner, every phone call, someone would mention a lovely retirement community they'd heard about, or a charming apartment that would be so much easier to maintain. Patricia started bringing real estate brochures when she visited, leaving them on my coffee table like casual reading material. Sarah took a different approach. She'd visit and point out everything that needed repair or updating. Mom, that back porch is becoming dangerous. See how the boards are warping? And the furnace is making that noise again. These old houses are just money pits. Dad would have wanted you to be practical about this. She kept invoking Robert's wishes, as if she knew better than I did what my husband of 44 years would have wanted for me. The business changes started subtly too. Michael explained that they needed to streamline operations and modernize management structures. He moved the office from the building behind our house to a sleek new facility in town. They hired outside consultants, implemented new systems, changed vendors who'd been with us for decades. It's nothing personal, Mom, Michael assured me when I asked why they'd let go our longtime secretary, Mrs. Patterson, who'd worked with us for 15 years. It's just business. We need people with current skills, updated computer knowledge. Mrs. Patterson was sweet, but she belonged to Dad's era. Dad's era. Like everything Robert and I had built was suddenly obsolete. They stopped including me in business decisions entirely. When I asked about quarterly reports or tried to understand new contracts, they'd exchange looks and speak to me in the patient, condescending tone people use with children. Don't worry about the business details, Mom. We've got everything under control. You should be focusing on taking care of yourself. But I'd been part of that business for over 30 years. I'd kept the books, managed the payroll, knew every aspect of operations. Being shut out felt like losing a piece of my identity. The real shock came 6 months after Robert's death, when James called and asked me to come to his office. He had some estate matters to discuss, he said. Some papers I needed to sign to finalize everything. I sat in his polished conference room, surrounded by diplomas and awards, feeling small and out of place in my simple dress and cardigan. James spread documents across the table, his manner professional but distant. Mrs. Whitman, I want to explain the current status of your husband's estate. As you know, before his death, Robert restructured his will and the business ownership to ensure maximum protection for the family assets. He slid a paper toward me. According to the current documentation, the business is now owned entirely by Michael, with Sarah and David as minority partners. The family home, along with the 3 acres, has been transferred to Michael as well, with provisions for you to remain there as long as you're able to maintain independent living. The words hit me like physical blows. Transferred to Michael? As long as I'm able? I don't understand, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The house is mine. Robert and I bought it together. I've lived there for 43 years. James's expression softened slightly, but his words remained clinical. Mrs. Whitman, your husband was concerned about estate taxes and business continuity. This structure protects the family assets and ensures the business can continue operating efficiently. You're completely taken care of course. Your living expenses, medical care, everything is covered. But I don't own anything. Nothing is actually mine. Your comfort and security are guaranteed, he repeated. Michael has committed to ensuring you have everything you need. I sat there staring at the papers, trying to understand how my entire life had been reduced to being a dependent in my own home. How the woman who'd co-built everything had become someone who owned nothing. Over the following months, the changes accelerated. Michael hired a property management company to maintain the farmhouse. Strangers showed up to trim trees I'd planted, to assess repairs I hadn't requested, to take inventory of items they deemed valuable assets of the estate. Patricia started making suggestions about my belongings. That china cabinet is lovely, Eleanor, but it's taking up so much space. We'd be happy to store your grandmother's china set in our house where it's safer. And honestly, at your age, do you really need 12 place settings? Sarah echoed similar sentiments about my jewelry, my photographs, my furniture. Everything was too much for me to manage, or would be safer elsewhere, or really should be preserved for the grandchildren. They were systematically stripping away everything that made my life mine. I started feeling like a visitor in my own home. Michael had keys, Patricia had keys, Sarah had keys. They'd arrive unannounced to check on me, or take care of some maintenance issues. My privacy disappeared. My autonomy evaporated. The breaking point began building around my 74th birthday. I'd been looking forward to hosting the family dinner like I had for decades. I'd planned the menu, bought groceries, spent days preparing Robert's favorite recipes. It was one of the few traditions I still controlled. Michael called the day before. Mom, we've decided to have your birthday dinner at our house this year. Patricia's hired caterers and we can accommodate everyone more comfortably. Don't worry about cooking. Just bring yourself. But I've already prepared everything, I protested. I've been cooking for 2 days. The pot roast is already in the oven. I'm sure it's delicious, but Patricia's already made arrangements. We can't change plans now. Just wrap up whatever you've made and bring it along. It'll be one less dish for the caterers to worry about. My birthday dinner became a side dish at someone else's party. That night, sitting in Patricia's pristine dining room, eating food prepared by strangers, listening to my children discuss business matters I was no longer privy to, I felt myself disappearing. Not dying, disappearing. Becoming irrelevant to the life I'd spent 7 decades building. The grandchildren, Tyler and Madison, barely acknowledged me. They were teenagers now, busy with their phones and their friends and their college prep courses. When they did speak to me, it was with the polite disinterest they might show any elderly stranger. These children I'd held as babies, whom I'd spoiled with homemade cookies and bedtime stories, looked at me like I was an inconvenience. After dinner, as I sat alone in Patricia's living room while the family discussed plans I wasn't included in, I overheard Michael talking to Sarah in the kitchen. She's getting more fragile, he said. Did you see how confused she looked when we were talking about the Morrison project? And she forgot Tyler's girlfriend's name again. I've been thinking the same thing, Sarah replied. Maybe it's time to seriously consider our options. We can't have her living alone much longer. What if she falls? What if she leaves the stove on? We'd be liable. Sunset Manor has that nice wing for people who need a little more supervision, Michael said. Patricia and I drove by last week. It's very clean, very professional. Mom would probably be happier around people her own age. They were talking about me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person who'd given them life. I stopped attending family gatherings after that. When they called to invite me, I'd make excuses. I wasn't feeling well, the weather was bad, I had other plans. The truth was, I couldn't bear to sit in rooms where my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed, where my memories were inconvenient and my opinions were dismissed. They interpreted my absence as evidence of my declining mental state. She's becoming antisocial, Patricia reported to whoever would listen. It's one of the early signs, you know. Withdrawal from family activities. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in my garden, pulling up the last of the tomato plants before the first frost, when I saw a car I didn't recognize in my driveway. A woman in a business suit got out, carrying a clipboard and a camera. I walked over, dirt still on my hands, to ask what she needed. "Mrs. Whitman? I'm Rebecca Collins from Hartfield Property Assessments. Your son Michael asked me to do a full evaluation of the property for insurance purposes. I hope this is a convenient time." Insurance purposes. I stood there, feeling the October wind cut through my cardigan, watching this stranger take photographs of my home, my garden, my life, and I knew. I finally understood what was happening. They weren't protecting me. They were preparing to dispose of me. The confrontation came 3 weeks later, on a gray November morning when the last leaves had fallen and the world felt stripped bare. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard cars in the driveway. Not just one car, 3 cars. Michael's BMW, Sarah's Mercedes, and David's pickup truck. All 3 of them. Together. On a Tuesday morning when they should have been at work. I watched through the window as they sat in their vehicles for several minutes, clearly discussing something, preparing for whatever was about to happen. Michael got out first, straightening his tie like he was heading into a business meeting. Sarah emerged next, clutching a folder of papers. David was last, his face grim, his shoulders set like he was bracing for battle. They knocked on my own front door. Knocked and waited for me to answer, as if they didn't have keys, as if this wasn't the house where I'd changed their diapers and nursed them through childhood illnesses and celebrated every milestone of their lives. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said when I opened the door. His voice had that careful, professional tone he used with difficult clients. "Can we come in?" I led them to the living room, the same room where we'd opened Christmas presents and played board games and where Robert had taught them to play chess. They arranged themselves across from me like a tribunal. Michael in Robert's favorite chair, Sarah and David on the sofa I'd reupholstered 3 times over the years. Sarah opened her folder. "Mom, we've been talking and we're concerned about your safety and well-being. Living alone in this big house isn't practical anymore. We think it's time to consider alternatives." Alternatives. Such a clean, sanitized word for destroying someone's life. "What kind of alternatives?" I asked, though I already knew. Michael leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. The expression he'd perfected for delivering bad news to clients. "There's a wonderful facility called Sunset Manor. It's not just a nursing home, it's a full-service retirement community with different levels of care. You'd have your own apartment, meal service, social activities, medical support right there if you need it." "I don't need medical support," I said. "I don't need meal service. I need my home." "Mom, be realistic," Sarah interjected. "You're 75 years old. This house is too much for you. The yard work, the maintenance, the isolation. What if you fall and no one finds you for days? What if there's a fire? What if your medication gets confused?" They had prepared for every argument, anticipated every objection. David spoke for the first time, his voice gentle but firm. "We love you, Mom. This isn't about getting rid of you. It's about making sure you're safe and cared for. Sunset Manor has a beautiful garden, a library, organized trips to museums and concerts. You might actually enjoy it. And if I don't want to go?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Michael shifted in his chair, exchanged a glance with his siblings. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its warmth. "Mom, legally the house belongs to the estate now. We have a responsibility to manage the assets properly. If you're not able to maintain independent living, we have to make decisions in your best interest." In your best interest. The words people use when they're about to destroy your life for their own convenience. "This is my home," I said, my voice rising. "I've lived here for 43 years. I raised you here. I watched your father die here. You cannot just throw me out like garbage." "No one's throwing you out," Sarah said quickly. "We're helping you transition to a better living situation. Sunset Manor is lovely, and you'll be close enough that we can visit regularly. When have any of you visited regularly? When have any of you called just to see how I am, not to tell me what I should be doing differently?" The truth hung between us like a blade. Michael's mask slipped slightly. "Mom, you're being emotional. We're trying to have a rational conversation about your future." "My future? Or your convenience? How much easier will your lives be when you don't have to worry about the old woman cluttering up the family property?" That's not fair, David said, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. Fair. I stood up, feeling something break loose inside my chest. You want to talk about fair? I gave birth to you three in this house. I spent 30 years building a business with your father, keeping books at this kitchen table, answering phones, making sure paychecks were written and bills were paid. I sacrificed my own dreams so you could inherit something worthwhile. And now you want to stuff me in a retirement home because taking care of me might interfere with your lives. You're twisting this, Sarah said. We're not abandoning you. We're making sure you get proper care. Proper care. I laughed, and it sounded bitter even to my own ears. Do you know what proper care looks like? Looks like family who visits because they want to, not because they have to. It looks like children who call their mother because they miss her voice, not because they need to check something off their responsibility list. It looks like grandchildren who know their grandmother's name without having to be reminded. The words poured out of me like water through a broken dam. I have been invisible to this family for years. You've taken my business, taken my home, taken my identity, and now you want to take the one place left where I can remember who I used to be. Where I can sit in the chair where your father read bedtime stories and remember what it felt like to be loved instead of tolerated. Michael stood up, his patience clearly exhausted. Mom, this conversation isn't productive. We've made arrangements with Sunset Manor. There's an opening in their assisted living wing next month. We think that gives you enough time to pack what you'll need and adjust to the idea. And if I refuse? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. But Michael was done with pretense. If you refuse, we'll have to pursue legal guardianship. Your behavior lately, the isolation, the paranoia, the resistance to reasonable suggestions, it all supports a case for diminished capacity. We'd rather not go that route, but we will if necessary. The room went completely silent. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the same clock Robert had bought for our 10th anniversary. I could hear the house settling around us, the familiar creaks and sighs of wood and stone that had sheltered our family for decades. This was it. This was the moment I understood that love could die while people were still breathing. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, David started. Get out. I screamed and they actually flinched. Get out of my house. Get out of my sight. I raised vipers and I have no one to blame but myself. They left without another word, but I could see it in their eyes. The relief that the unpleasant task was done, that they could now proceed with their plans without having to maintain the pretense of caring about my feelings. I stood at the window and watched them drive away, leaving tire tracks in the gravel driveway Robert had laid with his own hands. And for the first time since his death, I felt something besides grief and confusion. I felt rage. Pure, crystalline, focused rage. They thought they could dispose of me like an outdated piece of furniture. They thought they could erase me from the story of my own life. They thought that because I was old and alone and heartbroken I was powerless. They were about to learn how wrong they were. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a legal pad and I began to plan. Not my surrender, not my defeat, my strategy. Because if 43 years of marriage to Robert Whitman had taught me anything, it was that the best revenge is always served with careful preparation and perfect timing. I started with the business. Despite what my children believed, I still remembered every detail of how Whitman and Sons operated. I knew our suppliers, our subcontractors, our clients. More importantly, I knew our secrets. The corners we'd cut during lean years, the relationships that depended on handshake agreements, the family favors that had never been properly documented. My first call was to Bill Morrison, our longtime supplier at Morrison Lumber. Bill and Robert had been friends for 30 years, had helped each other through tough times, had built a relationship based on trust rather than contracts. Eleanor. Bill's voice was warm when he answered. How are you holding up, sweetheart? I've been better, Bill. I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. How has Michael been treating you since he took over? There was a pause. Well, he's businesslike. Very focused on the bottom line. He's been pushing for lower prices, shorter payment terms. Nothing illegal, mind you, but it's not the way we used to do business with your Robert. I knew it. Michael was burning bridges that had taken decades to build. But I need a favor. When Michael's current contract comes up for renewal, I want you to remember that some agreements can't be reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. Robert would have understood that. Over the following weeks, I made similar calls to everyone who'd worked with us over the years. I didn't ask them to do anything unethical. I simply reminded them of the relationships they'd had with Robert and me, the loyalty we'd shown during their difficult times, the respect we'd earned through years of fair dealing. The second part of my plan involved the farmhouse itself. My children thought they owned it, but they'd overlooked something crucial in their haste to secure their inheritance. The house was historic. Built in 1882, one of the oldest continuously occupied homes in the county. I'd been meaning to apply for historic designation for years but had never gotten around to it. I called the Historical Society and explained that I was interested in preserving the house for future generations. Mrs. Patterson, yes, the same Mrs. Patterson they'd dismissed from the business, was now volunteering there. She was delighted to help me navigate the application process. Historic designation would mean restrictions on any changes to the property, requirements for community approval for major modifications, and most importantly, limitations on how the land could be used. If Michael was planning to sell or develop the property, this would complicate his plans considerably. The third piece was more personal. I reached out to my grandchildren directly, not through their parents, but through social media, through their schools, through the few connections I still had with their lives. I didn't badmouth their parents or try to turn them against the family. Instead, I simply reminded them that I existed. I sent Tyler a message about a scholarship opportunity I'd seen that matched his interests in environmental science. I shared with Madison some articles about the college art programs she was considering. Small gestures, but ones that said, "Your grandmother remembers who you are and what matters to you." The responses were surprising. Both kids seemed genuinely pleased to hear from me, almost relieved to have contact that wasn't filtered through their parents' agenda. But the real masterstroke came from an unexpected source. Robert's younger brother Jim called me one evening in late November. Jim lived in California, had made a fortune in tech investing, and had always felt guilty that he hadn't stayed closer to the family business. "Eleanor, I've been thinking about Robert a lot lately," he said. "I know things have been difficult since he passed. Michael mentioned you're considering moving to a retirement community." Interesting. So Michael had been talking to Uncle Jim. "Jim, can I ask you something? Did Robert ever mention anything to you about his final wishes? About what he wanted to happen to the business, to the house?" "Funny you should ask. He called me about 6 months before he died, said he was worried about some of the changes the kids were pushing for. He didn't want to upset you with his concerns, but he asked me to keep an eye on things, make sure you were taken care of properly." My heart started beating faster. "Did he say anything specific?" "He said he trusted the kids to run the business, but he wanted to make sure you never felt pushed out of your own life. He made me promise that if you ever needed help I'd step in." 2 days later, Jim flew in from California. He was 68 now, silver-haired and successful, but he still had the same mischievous smile that had gotten him and Robert into trouble as boys. He took one look at the situation and whistled low. "Eleanor, I think my nephew has forgotten some important lessons about family loyalty." Jim was still a minority shareholder in Whitman and Sons, something Michael had apparently forgotten when he'd been restructuring everything. As an original investor and Robert's brother, Jim had certain rights that couldn't be simply erased by paperwork. More importantly, Jim had resources. When Michael called to inform me that my move to Sunset Manor had been finalized and I needed to be out by Christmas, I was ready. I told him I'd like to have one last family dinner in the house before I left. One final Christmas Eve in the home where we'd celebrated 43 Christmas Eves together. Michael agreed, probably thinking it would be easier to humor the sentimental old woman than to argue with her. Patricia catered the meal, of course. We couldn't risk letting the confused elderly person handle cooking duties. They all came. Michael and Patricia with Tyler and Madison. Sarah and James with their daughter Emma. David brought his new girlfriend, a sweet young woman who seemed uncomfortable with the family dynamics she was witnessing. Even Jim was there, having flown back from California, to support Eleanor during this difficult transition. We gathered in my dining room one last time, sitting around the table Robert had built with his own hands 30 years ago. The conversation was stilted, artificial, everyone trying to maintain the pretense that this was a normal family gathering rather than a wake for my independence. After dinner, I stood up and tapped my spoon against my wine glass. "I'd like to say something before we exchange gifts," I announced. The room fell silent. They probably expected a tearful speech about gratitude and acceptance. 43 years ago, Robert and I moved into this house with nothing but love and hope and a willingness to work for our dreams. We built a business together, raised our children together, created something we thought would last beyond our own lives. I looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes. I've learned that some gifts can't be inherited. Character, integrity, loyalty, these things have to be earned by each generation. And some gifts, once thrown away, can never be recovered. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Mom, this is supposed to be a nice evening. I'm not finished. My voice was steady, calm. I want to give each of you a Christmas gift. Michael, your gift is the knowledge that Sunset Manor no longer has a bed available for me. It seems their funding was unexpectedly reduced when several major donors, people who remembered your father's generosity to the community, decided to redirect their charitable giving. His face went pale. Sarah, your gift is the news that this house has been granted historic designation by the county. Any changes to the property now require approval from the Historical Society, and the land can never be developed commercially. I hope you'll enjoy many years of maintaining it exactly as it is. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish. David, your gift is the realization that loyalty works both ways. When you chose your inheritance over your mother, you made it clear where your priorities lie. I hope the money brings you happiness, because that's all you'll have left of this family. The silence was deafening. And for my grandchildren who barely know me because their parents have decided I'm no longer relevant, your gift is the truth. Your grandmother isn't confused or incapable. She's just tired of being treated like a burden by the people she sacrificed her life to raise. Jim cleared his throat. Eleanor, perhaps this is a good time to mention the other news. All eyes turned to him. I've decided to exercise my shareholder rights in Whitman and Sons. Effective immediately, I'm calling for a full audit of the company's operations, a review of all major contracts and personnel decisions made since Robert's death, and a restructuring of management to ensure the company returns to the values it was founded on. Michael's face went from pale to ashen. You can't do that, he sputtered. You signed away your involvement years ago. Actually, I signed away my day-to-day involvement. I never signed away my rights as Robert's heir or my responsibility to protect what he built. Eleanor, I believe you still have some business acumen that this company could benefit from. I smiled for the first time in months. I believe I do. The evening ended with my children and their spouses gathering their coats and their wounded dignity and leaving in cold, furious silence. The grandchildren seemed confused but oddly relieved, perhaps sensing that something honest had finally been said in a family that had forgotten how to speak truth. I spent that Christmas Eve in my own home by my own fireplace, drinking tea from my grandmother's china and feeling more at peace than I had in years. The months that followed weren't easy, but they were mine. Jim and I restructured Whitman and Sons to operate with actual integrity again. Several key clients who had been considering other contractors decided to give us another chance when they learned I was back involved. Some of our old suppliers welcomed us back with open arms. Michael, Sarah, and David were forced to accept minority roles in the company they'd thought they owned completely. More importantly, they learned that their inheritance came with responsibilities they weren't prepared for. I never did move to Sunset Manor. Instead, I stayed in my farmhouse, surrounded by my memories and my garden and my sense of self-worth. Jim bought a small place in town and became a regular visitor, bringing stories of his adventures and helping me maintain the property. The grandchildren started calling more often, visiting without their parents' supervision. Tyler came by to help with yard work and to hear stories about his grandfather. Madison brought her art supplies and painted watercolors of the farmhouse. Emma, Sarah's daughter, spent a weekend with me learning to bake bread the way I'd taught her mother 30 years ago. They were hungry for connection, for family stories, for the sense of belonging their parents had tried to sever. My children and I have an uneasy peace now. They learned that discarding your elders comes with consequences they hadn't anticipated. They lost business relationships, community respect, and the comfort of believing they were good people doing difficult but necessary things. More importantly, they lost the chance to have their mother's final years filled with love instead of resentment. They chose convenience over connection, and they'll have to live with that choice for the rest of their lives. As for me, I learned that growing old doesn't mean becoming powerless. It means accumulating enough wisdom to recognize when you're being manipulated, enough experience to know your own worth, and enough courage to fight for what matters. I'm 78 now. I still live in my farmhouse, still tend my garden, still remember every detail of the life I built with Robert. The difference is that now I'm surrounded by people who choose to be here, not people who feel obligated to tolerate me. And that, I've learned, makes all the difference in the world. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking this road with me. I hope this story gave you strength. Or at least the feeling that you're not alone. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us deepest, but that doesn't mean we have to accept being disposable. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Your worth isn't determined by other people's willingness to see it. Comment where you're watching from and maybe subscribe. Let's build a place where voices like mine, and maybe even yours, are finally heard.